You have 24 hours to sell your land or you'll never set foot on it again. That's what Karen, the HOA president, told me the morning they poured concrete across my only road. What she didn't know was that she just triggered a clause my father wrote into the deed a year ago. A clause that would strip her of power, expose her corruption, and take down the HOA from the inside out. If you think HOA drama is just about lawns and fences, you've never gone to war with a lawyer's son. Welcome to HOA Karen Files. Hit subscribe and buckle up because this time, the trap was in the fine print. She thought that was the end of it. She thought a wall of poured concrete would crush 2 years of planning. But all she did was trigger the clause. Because 12 months ago, when Karen signed off on my purchase agreement without reading Appendix 7, she signed away control of the access, of the land, and eventually of the whole damn community. This is not a story about one man building a house. It's about how people like Karen who rule through intimidation get taken down by the one thing they never expect, preparation. I found the listing late one night, 3.1 acres inside Pine Ridge Heights, forest to the west, natural stream to the south, prime land in an exclusive neighborhood, priced 60% below comparable lots. That's not a deal. That's bait. I called my father the next morning. Robert Cole, retired real estate attorney, 35 years in title law, easements, and land use warfare. To him, HOAs weren't an annoyance. They were an ecosystem of amateur tyrants hiding behind procedure. If that lot's cheap, it's because someone screwed up the paperwork, or the HOA is sitting on it like a vulture. So, we did what most buyers don't. We read every single page of the sale package, title history, parcel overlays, HOA, CC&Rs, and we found the catch almost immediately. The property had only one entrance, a narrow paved road privately maintained cutting through HOA-controlled land. There was no public easement, no alternate access from the rear. That meant whoever controlled that road controlled the land. Most people would walk away. I leaned in. My father and I spent 2 weekends crafting the kind of easement clause that should come with a warning label. Permanent, irrevocable right-of-way. Recorded with the county. Tied to the parcel, not to any HOA vote or permit. Violation penalties. Automatic enforcement triggers. And then buried deep in Appendix 7, we inserted something special. AA, contingency easement. If access was ever blocked, revoked, or made unreasonably inaccessible, the buyer me could activate a backup route through a separate parcel, Lot 237B, a narrow stretch of undeveloped land that cut straight through the HOA's core. It was like threading a wire through their entire neighborhood. Legally. Why would they ever sign that, I asked my dad. He didn't even look up, because they won't read it. HOA boards skim, they posture, they sign what they think they understand. We're not building a home, Nathan, we're building a net. I met Karen Delaney 2 weeks later. HOA president, early 50s, designer glasses, blazer sharp enough to slice drywall. She walked into the meeting like she expected applause. She didn't greet me, she greeted my application. So, you're the one buying Lot 118. We'd hoped to develop that parcel for community use, a clubhouse or pool expansion. She didn't say it like a question. She said it like I was stealing something from her. I handed over the documents. She skimmed fast like a bored juror at a traffic court trial, barely glanced at the appendices, initialed each page like it was a formality. I watched her sign away the trap. Right there on page 43. The meeting ended in less than 15 minutes. She shook my hand, but not like she meant it. Later, I'd find out she had tried to buy that same land 6 months earlier and been rejected. This wasn't about land. It was about ego. My wife, Emily, was already sketching window placement before escrow closed. She's a designer eye for light, space, and the kind of details most people overlook. We'd spent years living tight, no vacations, no impulse spending saving for one dream, a home we'd build ourselves. 2,800 square feet, modern craftsman, studio space for her work, an office for me. Nothing extravagant but ours. We started attending community meetings, hoping to get a feel for the neighborhood. What we got was frostbite. Karen welcomed us with the same energy as a tax audit, her tone polite, her smile tight. She introduced us as the new builders, not residents, not neighbors, just a project. That same night, during the president's update, she mentioned concerns about non-traditional development affecting community aesthetics. Nobody said our name, but all eyes were on us. On the way out, a man in his 60s caught up with me, Mark Davis, former Navy, lived 2 doors down from our future lot. "They don't like outsiders with independence," he said quietly. "Watch yourself. This board plays dirtier than they look." I thanked him, but I wasn't rattled. Because unlike Karen, I knew exactly what I'd signed. I wasn't supposed to overhear the conversation in the parking lot. Karen didn't see me behind the row of hedges. She was speaking with her vice president, Brian Hale, banker, gray suit, permanent smirk. "He'll give up," Karen said. "They all do eventually, especially once we make things inconvenient." I didn't record it, but I didn't need to, because everything after that night was textbook HOA harassment. And I documented every word. I didn't react the way most people would. When I heard Karen Delaney whisper about making things inconvenient for me, I didn't rush to post online. I didn't stomp into her office, demanding an explanation. I went home, I sat down, and I wrote it down, word for word. Because when you're going up against someone like Karen, you don't fight loud, you fight smart, and you document everything. The first shot came quietly. Emily and I submitted our building permit application to the county planning office, complete with architectural designs, environmental reports, and civil engineering plans. 2 weeks later, we got a rejection. Reason elevation drawings not to scale. I called the architect, furious. "That's ridiculous." He said, "They're industry standard. We've submitted the same format dozens of times." So, we resubmitted with an additional certification attached, rejected again. This time, environmental study incomplete. We hired a third-party consultant. They gave us a 120-page report detailing wildlife impact, water table safety, and runoff control far more than required. Still rejected. After the 4th denial, I noticed something strange. The rejection letters were all signed by the same person, Scott Taylor, Senior Planning Officer. Emily did some digging. She found a photo posted from a local charity golf event, Scott Taylor, smiling beside Brian Hale, Karen's vice president, arm around his shoulder, matching polos. Caption, "Best foursome in the league. So much for neutrality." I sent a carefully worded email to Scott's office, requesting clarification on his involvement and whether my application was being subjected to special review procedures. No reply. The permit process had turned into a maze, and someone was shifting the walls. Just when we thought it couldn't get pettier, it did. We received our first HOA violation letter. Our crime unkempt vegetation. The property face was still undeveloped. No house, no driveway, no utilities yet, just soil, some weeds, and a flagged survey marker. And yet, the letter claimed our parcel was impacting neighborhood aesthetic harmony. The fine $100 per day. I called the HOA office. No one had details. After being transferred 3 times, I finally reached Gail Simmons, the HOA treasurer. "It's the natural growth. The wild grass needs to be cut," she said, voice dry, annoyed. "It's undeveloped land. That doesn't exempt it from the landscaping standard," she replied. We didn't argue. I wasn't going to waste energy on that. Instead, I hired a professional landscaping company with commercial-grade equipment. They cleared the land, trimmed the perimeter, even mulched the border to HOA standards. The crew chief laughed when I explained the situation. "You're not the first. This HOA's infamous. We've had jobs canceled here mid-cut because someone complained about engine noise. When the work was done, I took 40-plus high-res photos, time-stamped them, and sent them along with the check for the fine. 3 days later, I got a 1-sentence email from Karen. We acknowledge the compliance. No further action needed, no apology, no confirmation the fine had stopped accruing, just a sentence. But I wasn't trying to win her favor. I was building a file. At this point, I had 3 active folders, permit barriers, all communications with Scott Taylor's office, HOA interference, letters, notices, and internal memos. Access, clause backup, easement terms, lot maps, and trigger conditions. I also had Emily doing background research. She compiled profiles on every HOA board member. That's when we discovered that Karen had tried to purchase our lot herself 8 months earlier and been rejected. Her plan was to build a new clubhouse, a vanity project she wanted her name on. Her offer was below asking. The seller declined. She'd never gotten over it. I finally understood. This wasn't about rules. This was personal. At the next monthly HOA meeting, I decided to test the waters. The room was about half full. Karen sat at the head of the table, Brian beside her, Gail taking notes. They ran the meeting like a courtroom with no judge, no input unless invited, no questions unless submitted in advance. But during Community Open Forum, I raised my hand. Karen glanced at me, sighed, nodded. "I'd like to ask about violation consistency," I said, standing calmly. "Because I noticed the lot on Sycamore Lane, vacant, has grass nearly 2 feet high, but no violation notice was issued." The room shifted uncomfortably. Karen's face tightened. "That's not an agenda item. Please submit all complaints in writing to the board," she snapped, cutting me off. "I'm just asking for clarification." "We're moving on," she said, gaveling the table. Samantha Blake, a new board member and attorney, glanced at me, then at Karen. She didn't say anything, but she didn't look impressed. As I walked to my car, Brian Hale stepped into my path. Dark blue suit, gold cufflinks, banker smile. "Word of advice. Cole," he said quietly, "this doesn't end well for people who make waves." I met his eyes. I didn't blink. That depends on whether they can swim. A few days later, we visited the lot, and someone had driven an ATV through the front field. Tire marks, ruts, mud, right where the foundation would go. The survey marker our architect had placed bright orange flag. Metal spike was gone. I emailed the HOA, attached photos, asked if they were aware of any scheduled work or known vehicle access. Karen's reply: "We encourage residents to install fencing if they're concerned about property trespass," which would have made sense, except the HOA banned fences on undeveloped parcels. The contradiction wasn't just funny, it was useful. I added it to the folder, back at home. Emily was reading through archived HOA newsletters. "Listen to this," she said. "Pine Ridge exists to protect community integrity from unchecked development. They published that 2 months before we bought the land. That's targeting us." Exactly. She highlighted another name, Scott Taylor, the planning officer. She'd found property records. His sister owned a house in Pine Ridge, right across the street from Karen. This wasn't just pressure, it was a network. "We're not going to beat them one move at a time," Emily said. "We need the whole pattern." I took everything: emails, photos, copies of rejections, violation letters, and created a timeline, mapped out every interaction, cross-referenced permit delays with HOA meeting notes, logged connections between names, addresses, and decisions. Then I called my father. "It's starting," I said. "The pressure, the games." He paused on the line. "Good. Let them escalate." "Why?" "Because every move they make pushes them closer to triggering the clause. Every letter, every denial, every wall they build gives us leverage they won't see until it's too late." He was right. They weren't just harassing me. They were walking into the contract. I knew the pushback would escalate, but even I didn't expect them to pour a wall of concrete across a legal easement. No warning, no announcement, just an orange sign, road closed for maintenance, no access, 3 to 5 days. That was the only road into my land. And this wasn't a maintenance project. This was a siege. I had built my case with facts. They were now building theirs with cement. Monday morning, 7:15 a.m. Emily called me from the lot. "There's a barricade across the entrance," she said, her voice tight. "Concrete blocks, no work crew, no signs of construction." I got there 20 minutes later. She wasn't exaggerating. They had blocked the entrance with 3 full-height traffic barriers, industrial concrete, the kind used on highway medians. And behind them, nothing. No machinery. No contractors. Not even a single caution cone beyond the blockade. I contacted the HOA office immediately. Karen wasn't available. Of course, the assistant, clearly uncomfortable, couldn't provide any maintenance schedule or documents. When I asked who authorized the closure, she said it was a board-level directive. I requested documentation. She told me to file a written request. I did within the hour. Then I called my father. They just crossed the line. I said. His response was short. Time to prepare the clause. I had 3 choices. 1. Wait and hope the maintenance ended. 2. File a soft complaint with the city and spin in circles. 3. Trigger the contractual contingency they never thought I'd use. I chose option 3, but first, I needed evidence. So I hired a drone pilot. Over the next 5 days, we flew over the area every morning and evening, recording time-lapse aerials. There was no road work, no equipment ever arrived, no materials ever delivered, not even a soil test taken. They weren't fixing the road. They were using it as a weapon. On day 6, I sent a formal demand letter to the HOA. It cited the recorded access easement, detailed photographic evidence of no construction, and stated they had 48 hours to remove the obstruction or face legal consequences. Each board member received a copy by certified mail. Karen's was delivered in person. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Brian Hale. Vice President. Tone cold. Language sanitized. The board has reviewed your concerns. The road will be reopened by end of day tomorrow. He paused. However, due to increased traffic concerns, we are initiating a review of new access policies, which may affect your property's eligibility. There it was. They weren't backing off. They were just shifting tactics, and the mention of eligibility was key, because it meant they didn't understand something important. Access rights don't expire. They don't fluctuate with policy. They're contractual, permanent, and legally binding, and more importantly, they had already voided theirs. 3 days later, I arrived at the property with the construction team. We were set to begin foundation prep. We had permits, equipment, survey stakes, and what we found stopped us cold. Overnight, they had built a permanent concrete wall across the road, thicker, higher, and reinforced with rebar, not just a barricade, a structure. It extended fully across the private access road, 10 feet in from the curb. A fresh sign installed: HOA property, no access. Violators will be prosecuted. They weren't hiding anymore. This wasn't obstruction. This was civil interference. I stood there for over a minute, saying nothing. Behind me, Emily whispered. They think we'll walk away. But I wasn't walking. I was loading the trap. I drove straight to Karen's house. Didn't knock like a neighbor. I knocked like a man who'd had enough. She opened the door with that same artificial calm I'd seen at meetings. Mr. Cole, this is highly inappropriate. You poured a wall across my easement. The board has determined that the road is not subject to private access at this time. She replied. Her eyes didn't flinch. The recorded easement says otherwise. That's up for interpretation. I paused, then said 6 words I knew would land like a hammer. You signed the clause? Appendix 7. Her face froze. Not confusion, not surprise, recognition. She knew the name. She just didn't remember what it said, or how badly it was about to matter. I didn't sleep. I sat in my office, pulling out the contract, the satellite images, the clause. Emily came in around 2 a.m., sat beside me, didn't speak. I looked at her. Do we fight this all the way? She didn't hesitate. We finished what we started. Appendix 7 wasn't a backup. It was a trigger. In the event that primary access was obstructed, whether physically or administratively, the buyer retained the right to activate an alternate easement across Lot 237B, a narrow strip of undeveloped land owned by the HOA. The clause had been signed, initialed, and recorded. The path of Lot 237B. It ran straight through the heart of Pine Ridge Heights past 5 board members' properties. A private road would become a construction corridor, noise, trucks, dust, daily movement, and it would be 100% legal. They'd tried to fence me out. Now I was going to walk right through them. A well-written contract is like a loaded gun. Silent, precise, useless in the wrong hands, but, in the right ones, deadly. And Karen had handed me the bullets a year ago when she initialed the clause in Appendix 7 without reading it. Now it was time to pull the trigger. At 7:42 a.m. the next morning, I submitted a certified notice of activation to the HOA. Its language was cold, precise, and crafted for maximum legal pressure, pursuant to the signed and recorded agreement of sale, including, but not limited to. Appendix 7, the undersigned hereby activates the contingency easement right via Lot 237B due to continued obstruction of primary access. Attached was a parcel map showing the route highlighted in red, cutting through the Pine Ridge HOA's internal buffer zones and running directly behind the properties of Karen Delaney, Brian Hale, and Gail Simmons. I included drone photographs of the illegal concrete barricade, dated documentation of every obstruction attempt, and notarized declarations from both myself and my contractor. Copies were sent to HOA board members, Pine Ridge Legal Counsel, County Zoning Office, Public Utility Department, and every homeowner whose parcel would be within 100 feet of the proposed access road. Because this was never just about my land anymore. It was about what they signed and what came next. 3 hours later, I got an email from HOA General Counsel. 3 lines: "We acknowledge receipt of your notice. The HOA requests a formal meeting with you to discuss this matter further." That afternoon, an emergency notice went out to residents' special session of the HOA board to address access easement concerns. Attendance encouraged. Within 48 hours, the community center was packed wall to wall. Karen had never seen this much interest in an HOA meeting. Unfortunately for her, it wasn't admiration, it was suspicion. Karen called the meeting to order with her usual detached poise, flanked by Brian on one side, Gail on the other. But tonight, something was different. The crowd didn't lean in when she spoke. They leaned back, watching, judging. I waited until the second agenda item, discussion of land access challenges before standing. My name is Nathan Cole. I own Lot 118, and I have no interest in turning our community into a war zone. But make no mistake, the wall you poured was illegal, and you signed the clause that gives me the right to bypass it. I plugged in a flash drive and connected to the projector. Slide 1, map of the original access route, overlaid with drone footage showing the concrete barricade. Slide 2, map of contingency route through Lot 237B, highlighted in red. Slide 3, Appendix 7, Paragraph 4. Verbatim quote from the signed document, with Karen's initials beside it. You agreed that if primary access is ever unreasonably obstructed, this is your term, not mine. I gain the right to activate an easement across this parcel. The room went quiet. I turned to face the crowd. That means the road's going in, right past the president's backyard, right behind Mr. Hale's tennis court, and across the board's community garden. And legally, there's nothing they can do to stop it. Karen tried to speak. This meeting is not a court of law. No, I said. It's not, but what you've done crosses civil boundaries. And if you force this, I'll take it to court. Where this clause has precedent, your wall violates property law, and your actions could be considered intentional interference with recorded rights. She flinched at that, because the term was deliberate and actionable. Then, the unexpected happened. Samantha Blake, the junior board member and attorney, stood up. Mr. Cole's interpretation is legally sound. I reviewed the agreement after receiving the notice. The clause is enforceable, and frankly, she looked around the room. This board has exposed the HOA to serious liability. Karen turned to her, stunned. You're siding with him. I'm siding with the law. The room murmured. Several residents nodded. The air was shifting. The silence had broken. Brian tried a new tactic. Mr. Cole, if you activate this road, you'll destroy property values, create daily noise and traffic, and alienate your future neighbors. I looked at him and smiled just slightly. I didn't pour a wall. I didn't block legal access. I didn't start a campaign of harassment. Your board did. And now you're discovering that power without paperwork is just theater. I offered multiple chances to resolve this. You ignored everyone. Now, we proceed. I handed a printed packet to each board member, copies of the permit application for the new access road, already submitted to the county. Their eyes scanned the documents like a drowning man looking for air. There wasn't any. As the board struggled for footing, a voice rose from the crowd. Why didn't we know about this clause? Another. They told us he didn't have legal access, that this land wasn't zoned for a home. And another, I have a kid who rides his bike on that path. If trucks are coming through, I want to know why we weren't told about this earlier. Karen tried to regain control. We acted in good faith to protect the community. No, I said calmly. You acted to protect your agenda. And now the community is paying the price for your arrogance. The board voted publicly to delay any further actions pending legal review. But the damage was done. The residents saw the playbook. They saw the abuse, the ignorance, the recklessness. And most importantly, they saw me a man they had been told was reckless, vindictive, dangerous, standing calmly, methodically dismantling the people who had lied to them. After the meeting, several residents came to shake my hand. Mark Davis, the former Navy neighbor, gave me a short nod. Good work, he said. Samantha approached next. If you're serious about fixing this, I'll help, but the board won't go quietly. They never do. I replied. That night, Karen sent a private email. Thinly veiled, perhaps there is a way to resolve this. Discreetly. I'm open to discussing alternative forms of settlement if the access issue can be deferred. Translation. She was ready to offer me money to stop the road, to bury the clause, to make the problem disappear. I replied with 2 words. Too late. They had failed to stop me with bureaucracy. They had failed to block me with concrete. Now, they would try something more desperate. And in doing so, they would finally cross a line they could never return from. It happened just before dawn on a Monday. I arrived at the property to check on the grading crew. Instead, I found the excavator, hydraulic lines slashed. 2 pallets of cement, smashed and soaked. The site trailer's wiring ripped clean out. It wasn't just vandalism. It was methodical, professional, deliberate. The security system I installed weeks earlier had done its job. 4 separate cameras, multiple angles, 2 masked figures, dark hoodies, license plate partially visible. They weren't amateurs, but they weren't ghosts either. I called the police, filed the report, handed over the footage. The responding officer reviewed the video in silence. This wasn't random, he said quietly. No, it wasn't. By that afternoon, a detective followed up. I gave him everything. Footage, delivery logs, my full file on HOA interference. He watched the videos twice, then paused one frame. The getaway van, that logo, he said, zooming. That's Apex Subcontracting. You familiar? I was. It was the same firm Karen used when she bid to build the clubhouse on my land last year. I said nothing, just stared. They're connected, he asked. More than you know. I handed him a manila folder. Inside Karen's initial clubhouse proposal, email correspondence, and a bank statement showing a payment from Apex to her husband's real estate trust. The detective let out a breath. This just became something else. Meanwhile, Emily had been working her own angle. Samantha Blake, the lawyer on the HOA board, had quietly shared access to board meeting minutes and financial logs going back 2 years. What we found, dozens of executive sessions held off record, 18,500 oscillars billed for consulting with no vendor name, HOA debit card charges at luxury restaurants far from the community, and worst of all, a wire transfer to Karen Delaney Properties, LLC. They were laundering HOA money under project planning. On paper, it looked harmless. But tied to the sabotage, it was motive. And motive is all a good prosecutor needs. While we compiled evidence, the community woke up. Residents who had previously avoided confrontation started showing up at HOA meetings, openly asking about line items, demanding transparency, requesting audits. Karen's mask began to slip. Where she once brushed off questions with elegance, now she snapped. When an elderly couple asked about landscaping fines, She accused them of trying to undermine the board's authority. The room turned, and they didn't turn back. 2 weeks later, just before we were set to begin construction on the new access road through Lot 237B, I received a letter from the county zoning board. Proposal to designate my property and surrounding parcels as a protected greenbelt conservation zone. If passed, construction would be permanently barred. There it was, the final play. Karen had reached beyond the HOA now. She'd gone to her contacts in the county, used influence, favors, connections. It was smart. Too bad we saw it coming. That conservation filing was exactly what I needed, because in the very back of Appendix 7, my father had written one final failsafe. In the event of zoning or municipal interference directly or indirectly resulting from HOA action, the buyer retains conditional authority over shared parcel lot 248C, also known as the community lake, until access is fully restored. It was legal judo. They blocked my land, I blocked their lake, and the lake wasn't just a pretty pond, it was the centerpiece of the community. Property values depended on it. HOA assessments depended on it. Karen's identity depended on it. I filed the activation notice at 9:12 a.m. the next morning, and then I called for a full community meeting. The meeting was packed, standing room only. Karen tried to control the floor. She failed. I stepped forward and calmly connected to the projector. First slide the lake, drone shot at sunset. Second the deed, third the clause, signed, initialed, dated. This is not retaliation. I told the room, this is enforcement. You tried to erase my access. So now, by your own signatures, I assume temporary rights over Lot 248C. Until the road is cleared, the lake is closed. The room erupted, not in anger at me, at her. Residents shouted, board members argued. Karen stood alone. One voice rose over the chaos. Barbara, a soft-spoken widow, stood up. "You've embarrassed all of us," she said. "You made us the kind of neighborhood people warn their friends about." Karen tried to speak. She couldn't, because Samantha Blake pulled out one final piece of paper. "I'm filing a motion for a vote of no confidence." Cheers, applause, and then silence. Everyone looked at me. I didn't gloat, I didn't smirk. I just said I didn't come here to fight. I came here to build a home. You made it a battlefield, and now you've lost. Power built on silence always falls loudest. The day after the lake clause was activated, I received 3 separate calls, one from Karen's personal attorney, one from the county legal office, and one from a local news station that had gotten wind of the HOA's internal meltdown. The war was no longer private. Karen had gone from untouchable to toxic overnight. Within 48 hours of the emergency meeting, Samantha Blake officially filed a recall petition, supported by over 65% of homeowners. The county zoning board reversed the Greenbelt classification request after receiving legal threats and media pressure. Yes, bust. The HOA's insurance carrier began an internal audit, triggered by the vandalism claim I filed with the police. Karen was finished. She just didn't admit it yet. 2 days later, a closed-door HOA session was held, one last desperate attempt to salvage control. Samantha invited me to attend as a witness. I brought my father. The room was quieter than I expected. Karen sat at the head of the table, not like a leader, but like a defendant. Brian Hale wasn't there. Gail Simmons hadn't shown up either. Only Karen, Samantha, 2 other members, and us. "Mr. Cole," Karen said coldly, "there's been enough damage. Surely we can resolve this amicably." I looked at her. I let the silence stretch. I offered amicable 4 times. I said, "You poured concrete, you filed fake zoning actions, you sabotaged equipment." She clenched her jaw. "None of that can be proven." I slid a small USB across the table. "You're welcome to test that theory in court." She didn't touch it. Samantha spoke next. "Karen, I've reviewed everything. You misused HOA funds. You acted outside board authority. And you endangered the association's legal standing. The board has the votes. You're out." Karen leaned back. For a moment, she almost looked relieved. Then came the final twist. Samantha opened a new document. We're also issuing a full audit notice. You'll need to surrender your email logs, bank statements, and any private contractor communications tied to HOA projects. Karen stood abruptly. You have no idea what I've done to keep this place running. That's what terrifies us, Samantha said quietly. The next day, a public letter appeared on the HOA website. Effective immediately. I, Karen Delaney, resign from my position as president of the Pine Ridge HOA. It has been an honor to serve. No apology, no ownership, just exit. By that evening, a moving truck was parked in front of her home. She didn't say goodbye. No one came to help her pack. Her reign ended not with applause, but with the sound of duct tape and cardboard. The HOA audit uncovered everything we expected. $42,000 in misclassified community events. $18,000 in personal travel reimbursements. Dozens of undocumented advisory fees to Apex-linked firms. And suspicious communications between Karen and a zoning consultant flagged in the Sabotage investigation. Criminal charges were filed within 2 months. Karen accepted a plea deal to avoid trial restitution, community service, and permanent disqualification from any HOA position in the state. Samantha Blake was elected interim president. Under her leadership, the HOA passed term limits for board members, independent financial audits every 6 months, open meeting laws with required public disclosure, and an ethics charter barring undisclosed vendor relationships. For the first time, homeowners felt like they actually owned their homes again. 6 months later, our dream home stood finished. 2,700 square feet. Natural light for Emily's art studio. A quiet office for me. And in the backyard, the gate that started it all, leading back toward the main road. I could have paved the access road through Lot 237B just to make a point, but I didn't. Once the main easement was restored and legally recognized by the county, I closed the backup road myself. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. One evening, Samantha came by with a bottle of wine. You could have humiliated her more, she said. I didn't need to, I replied. She did it to herself. We stood by the lake, Lot 248C, the community's jewel that I once held in the palm of my hand. Now, it was just water again. No leverage, no threat, just peace. Karen sold her home below market value. Her LinkedIn went dark. The HOA removed her name from all documents. But her legacy lives on as a cautionary tale at HOA law conferences across 3 states. And me, I never wanted a fight. But I also never walked away from one. I didn't start. When you sign something, read it. When you hold power, wield it fairly. And if you ever find yourself pouring a wall where a neighbor's driveway used to be, make sure he doesn't have a father who was a real estate lawyer. Because in law, details aren't small. They're everything. Karen thought she could bury me with paperwork, politics, and concrete. But in law, the sharpest blade is the one you never see coming because it was signed in blue ink a year before the fight began. Her kingdom fell. My home now stands. And the community finally free from fear. Sometimes, justice doesn't shout. Sometimes, it shows up wearing reading glasses and carrying a contract. Subscribe to HOA Karen Files because in this neighborhood, we don't make this stuff up. Real people really are this wild.